I never thought the night my son invited me to a simple family dinner would be the night everything I'd kept hidden for decades erupted like a storm. I didn't expect to walk into that fancy restaurant looking like a woman held together by threads, only to watch my daughter-in-law's parents try to quietly erase me from my own child's life. But what none of them knew was that I wasn't the broke, harmless, ordinary woman they believed I was. And when the truth finally came out, it shattered every smile at that table. And how all this happened. Let's start from the beginning, before continuing. Please subscribe and tell me where you're watching this story from, because what I'm about to tell you is still unbelievable. My name is Denise Holloway, and for most of my 61 years, people have seen exactly what they expected. A calm woman with a modest apartment, sensible shoes, and a quiet job that never made anyone look at me twice. My own son Yolan thought I spent my days filing paperwork somewhere, living on just enough to get by. He believed that because I let him believe it. I never told him that for 18 years. Been a senior corporate strategist, one trusted to negotiate million-dollar deals and oversee international operations. I never told him I earned $38,000 a month, or that my investments had turned me into someone very few people could afford to underestimate. Why didn't I tell him? Because I didn't want my son growing up thinking wealth was the measure of a person's worth. I didn't want him drawing a line between people who matter and people who don't. I'd seen too many good hearts turn cold, chasing recognition and status. I wanted something different for him. But then came the call. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Yolan phoned me, his voice trembling the way it used to when he broke a vase or scraped his knee. "Ma, I need a favor." His wife Kiana's parents were flying in from overseas. "It would mean a lot if you came to dinner," he said. But his tone felt less like an invitation and more like a request for me not to embarrass him. So I asked gently, "What did you tell them about me?" There was a long silence. Then he said it that you're simple. You just work at an office. You don't make much. Simple. That one word felt like someone pressed a thumb against a bruise I'd been hiding for years. Not because he meant harm, but because he didn't know me. He didn't know the battles I'd fought, the late nights, the sacrifices, the loneliness, the victories I never bragged about. But that was my fault, wasn't it? I had kept the truth buried, so I agreed to the dinner. And I decided they were expecting a quiet, broke, insignificant woman. Then that's exactly who they would meet. I wanted to see who they really were when they thought. They had nothing to gain from me. On Saturday evening, I slipped into the worst dress I owned, gray, baggy, wrinkled. My shoes were so worn they barely had shape. I tied my hair into a loose knot and carried a faded tote bag that looked like it had survived a hurricane. When I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. I looked like a woman life had forgotten. Perfect. The taxi ride to the restaurant felt like a countdown. My heart wasn't pounding because I feared being judged. No. I had survived far worse than judgment. What scared me was the possibility that Yolan had inherited values that weren't mine. The taxi stopped in front of a 5-star restaurant glowing like a palace. And the moment I stepped through that glass door, everything began to unfold. Don't miss the next part. Things shift the moment I walk up to the table. And the first insult comes sooner than anyone expected. Asterisk. The moment I stepped into that restaurant, its gold chandeliers dripping light like honey, its marble floors polished enough to see your reflection, I felt every eye turned toward me. Not because I was glamorous, but because I didn't fit. My wrinkled dress, my worn shoes, my little canvas bag, they made me stand out in a place designed for people who like to look expensive. Jlen saw me first. He was standing near the table, adjusting his tie in a way I'd only seen him do before job interviews or bad news. His eyes widened when he saw my outfit, his jaw tightening like he wanted to swallow his own embarrassment. "Ma, you came," he said softly. "I told you I would." I answered with a timid smile, the kind of smile I knew they expected from a woman with nothing. Then I looked at Kiana. She wore a cream-colored dress with gold trim, her curls pinned perfectly, her posture sharp as a blade. She gave me a quick, polite kiss on the cheek, cold as winter wind. "It's good to see you, mother-in-law," she said, but her eyes flicked over my outfit with a flash of panic. I made a mental note of that. People reveal themselves in their first look, but nothing prepared me for meeting her. Parents, Kiana's mother, sat regally at the center of the table, wearing a deep burgundy dress with crystals that sparkled every time she moved. Her name was Vivian Carter, and she had the kind of beauty that warned you she'd spent her life being admired and expected it. Beside her sat her husband, Terrence Carter, tall, polished, and stiff as a sculpture in a museum. Vivian gave me a brief glance, one single sweep from my shoes to my hair. It felt like she stamped a label on my forehead. Unimportant. "Hello," she said, forcing a polite smile that barely touched her lips. Her handshake was soft, quick, dismissive, like she didn't want to get fingerprints on herself. Terrence nodded and said, "Pleasure," though his voice sounded like the pleasure was very, very small. I took my seat at the far end of the table. No one offered to help me with my chair. Not that I needed the help, but the lack of gesture said a lot. A waiter placed elegant French menus in front of us. I opened mine and purposely pretended not to understand any of it. Vivian watched me with delicate amusement. "Do you need help with the menu, Denise?" she asked sweetly, too sweetly. "Yes. I don't really know these dishes," I answered softly. Lowering my gaze, she exhaled dramatically, like she was doing charity. "We'll order something simple for you." Something. Comfortable. That word again. They loved using words that sounded polite but hit like insults. Terrence added, "No need to choose anything expensive. We'd hate for you to feel overwhelmed." I gave a small nod, playing the part, though inside I felt a slow, cold fire rising. Have you ever had a moment where someone underestimates you so badly you almost feel sorry for them? I felt exactly that. Dinner continued with Vivian bragging about their hotel suite, only $900 a night. Nothing extravagant, and their jewelry purchases just a few thousand. Every time she spoke, she looked at me, waiting for admiration I never gave. I kept smiling, kept nodding, playing the role perfectly. But when Vivian leaned forward and asked, "So Denise, do you manage to live comfortably on your salary?" With that syrupy, condescending tone, I felt something inside me sharpen. Because that question, that was the first knife. What would you have done if you were in my seat? Stayed quiet or spoken up? Sometimes I wonder if silence teaches more than words. I simply answered, "I get by." Vivian smiled wide, satisfied like she'd confirmed every assumption. She walked in with Dot. She had no idea what storm she was inviting. Don't miss the next part. Vivian's next comment crosses a line, and I start realizing this dinner isn't just rude, it's intentional. Vivian's smile stayed frozen on her face, a polished social grin people use when they want to insult you without moving their lips too much. But there was something else in her eyes, something calculating. Measuring, weighing my worth like I was an item on clearance. She cut into her steak delicately and spoke with the elegance of someone who'd rehearsed their entire life for an audience. "You know, Denise," she said lightly, "Kiana grew up with very high standards. We've always believed that the people around her should reflect the same. It's how she was raised." I lifted my gaze slowly. "High standards are important," I replied, keeping my voice small on purpose. Terrence added, "Exactly. Stability matters. Financial stability especially. It can make or break a marriage." There it was, another subtle jab. A coded message wrapped in politeness. Yolan shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His foot tapped beneath the table. He looked at me briefly, then back at his plate, as if hoping the conversation would magically change direction. Vivian leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice in a faux whisper. "Kiana and Yalan have a bright future. They just need support, structure, a certain type of environment." Her meaning was clear as crystal water. I nodded softly. "I understand." Vivian smiled as if that confirmed something she already believed. She reached for her wine, something imported, things she just had to describe earlier as a bottle that costs more than most monthly rents, and took a delicate sip. Terrence cleared his throat and said, "Yolone mentioned you live alone, right?" "Yes, and your apartment. It's small. Comfortable enough for me." Vivian tilted her head in pity, that kind of pity that isn't pity at all. "It must be difficult," she said, "living on a limited income at your age. But you're admirable, truly, making do with so little." Kiana looked away, embarrassed. Yalan silently clenched his fist. I sat completely still, because every word Vivian said told me who she was. But more importantly, every word told me who she thought I was. And that was the moment I realized something. This wasn't rudeness. This wasn't ignorance. This was a performance. A carefully orchestrated dinner where they would place me under a microscope and dissect every piece of my life until they could decide whether I deserved to exist in theirs. Vivian dabbed her mouth with her napkin. "Tell me, Denise, were you able to help Yolan when they married? I only ask because we contributed a great deal to give them a strong start." I kept my eyes lowered. I gave what I could. "Oh," she replied, nodding as if she'd expected that. "That's sweet. Every tiny effort counts." It's tiny. She said it with such gentle cruelty that even the candle flames seemed to shiver. Silence fell for a moment, heavy, uncomfortable, thick like fog. Only the soft clinking of silverware filled the air. Then Vivian began again. "We gave them the down payment for their home, of course. And the honeymoon. 3 weeks in Europe. It costs quite a bit, but we don't mind. We invest in our children. It's what strong families do." She said it with a pointed glance at me, a sharp blade wrapped in velvet. I breathed slowly. If I had reacted emotionally, if I had flinched, frowned, or snapped, I would have lost. Instead, I played the role she expected me to play, the quiet, fragile, grateful woman who didn't understand she was being insulted. Dinner continued with more little stabs disguised as compliments, more reminders of their wealth, more comparisons, more judgments. Finally, the desserts arrived, tiny and beautiful, placed like gold on the plates. Vivian picked up her fork and said casually, "There's actually something we'd like to discuss with you, Denise." As a family, her tone turned soft. It's too soft. That softness felt like the beginning of a trap. Don't miss the next part. The family discussion reveals their true intentions, and it's far worse than simple insults. Vivian placed her fork down gently, folding her hands with a grace that came from years of being treated like royalty. Terrence straightened his posture, clearing his throat with a sense of ceremony. Even Kiana looked uneasy, as if she already knew whatever her parents were preparing to say would land heavily on the table. I kept my eyes lowered. The same timid posture I'd maintained all evening. I wanted them comfortable. I wanted them confident. I wanted them to believe that I was someone who accepted whatever they decided for me. Vivian inhaled deeply, then smiled a soft, careful smile meant to appear warm but carried nothing warm inside it. "Denise," she began, "I think tonight is the perfect moment for all of us to be transparent with one another." Her voice sounded syrupy, slow, controlled. A tone people use before delivering something they believe is generous, even when it's cruel. "Yes," Terrence added. "Openness leads to harmony." I nodded faintly, as if I welcomed the lesson. Vivian pressed her palms together. "As you know, Kiana and Yalan are building a life together. A promising life. But marriage requires balance. And, well, certain things can disrupt that balance." I felt Yolan tense next to her. His hand slid beneath the table, his fingers tapping nervously on his knee. Vivian continued, "We want the best for them. We've always ensured Kiana lived a life with structure, comfort, and security. And now that she's married, we want to ensure she continues in that stability." She paused deliberately, letting the words sink in. I waited, silent, letting her dig deeper. Terrence leaned forward. "Yalan already has a lot on his shoulders: career growth, financial responsibilities, planning for a family one day. He can't afford additional pressures." My breath remained steady. Vivian nodded supportively. "That includes emotional pressures and financial ones. The trap finally revealed itself. Kiana looked down as if she wished she could disappear. Vivian lowered her voice gently. We know you do your best, Denise, truly. But living alone at your age, on a modest salary. We worry. I blinked slowly, pretending to absorb her concern. We don't want Yolan to feel obligated to support you in ways that might affect his marriage, she continued. That kind of burden could create tension between him and Kiana. Burden? There it was. Terrence clasped his hands together as if finalizing a business deal. So he said, Vivian and I have discussed an arrangement. Vivian nodded with a serene expression, her tone almost maternal. We can help you, she said softly. Financially, monthly. I raised my eyes just a little. Enough for them to see a flicker of gratitude that wasn't real. Vivian smiled wider, proud of her generosity. Not a large amount, but enough for you to live comfortably. Perhaps $500 a month. Maybe $700 if needed. My heart slowed. $700. In exchange for something they hadn't yet said, but I already sensed. Vivian leaned in. Her voice now velvet-trapped steel. And in return, we ask that you give the newlyweds space. Don't rely on Yolan too much. Don't visit unannounced. Don't require him to divide his attention. Terrence added calmly, essentially. Allow them to build their life without interruptions. It was the most elegant way I had ever heard someone tell a mother to step aside. To be less present. To be quiet. To disappear. Kiana looked at me with tears gathering in her eyes, not because she disagreed, but because she was ashamed to hear the words spoken aloud. Yolan looked horrified. Vivian waited for my answer, wearing the confident expression of a woman who expected compliance. I lifted my napkin, wiped my lips slowly, took a sip of water, then I said quietly, that is a very interesting offer. Vivian smiled. Thinking she'd won. She had no idea she had just opened the door to a truth she wasn't prepared to face. Don't miss the next part. I begin asking questions, and every answer starts unraveling Vivian's arrogance thread by thread. I let their offer hang in the air, soft, poisonous, wrapped in politeness. Vivian waited with a serene smile, convinced she had solved a problem that only existed in her imagination. Terrence looked proud, as if he'd just brokered a peace treaty. But Yolan looked like a man silently drowning. I folded my hands on the table and kept my voice small and delicate, the way they assumed it naturally was. I appreciate the thought, I said quietly. May I ask something just so I understand? Vivian nodded immediately. Of course, Denise. We want you to be completely comfortable. Comfortable. They kept using that word the way people use perfume to mask a smell. I took a gentle breath. You mentioned you worry I might rely on Yolan. Too much. May I ask why you think that? Terrence answered first, his tone matter-of-fact, as though he was discussing the weather. Well, you live modestly, and modest circumstances can create unexpected needs. Vivian chimed in with a sympathetic tilt of her head. We just want to avoid complications. Jalen's trying to grow in his career. He has responsibilities, now bigger ones. Providing for you shouldn't be one of them. I nodded slowly. I see. Vivian smiled, encouraged by my calmness. We mean well, Denise, truly. This arrangement would give you peace and give them freedom. Everyone benefits. I lowered my gaze again, hiding my true expression. She continued, you raised a wonderful son. And now that he's married, he needs to focus on his future. His wife, his goals. It's natural. It's natural to erase the mother, to push her to the edges of her child's life. But I played along. So I murmured softly, you feel I might interfere. Vivian touched her chest lightly, as if the idea pained her. Not intentionally, of course. You're kind, but we all have our own limitations. And sometimes love blinds us. Terrence nodded. Boundaries are important. I gently placed my napkin back on the table. And you're offering me money? If I agree to stay in my place? Vivian smiled warmly. Not like that. Think of it as support. A gesture of goodwill. Yalun finally spoke, his voice low and tight. Mom doesn't need your money. Vivian's warm expression hardened just a fraction. Yolande, darling, you don't understand. We're simply trying to help maintain balance. Jalen's jaw tensed, but he went quiet again, caught between love and discomfort. I looked at all of them one by one, my expression soft, unthreatening. How long would this support last? I asked. Terrence rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Well, as long as necessary. Until the newlyweds settle securely into their life. Could be a year. Could be 2, Vivian added gently, or more, if needed. We're flexible enough to keep me away until they felt I matched their standards. I nodded again, the perfect picture of fragile gratitude. And what else would this arrangement include? Vivian smiled knowingly. We would like you to limit visits. Avoid sudden drop-ins. Not request financial help from Yolan, and perhaps allow them space during the holidays. They need to establish their own traditions. Holidays. Traditions. Moments I had dreamed of sharing with my son and future grandchildren. She wanted all of it. She wanted control. I felt the warmth drain from my chest, but none of it reached my face. Instead, I said softly, that makes sense, truly. Vivian exhaled, relieved. She thought I was accepting. Terrence leaned back, satisfied. Even Kiana looked confused. She had expected more resistance. But they didn't understand me. Not yet. Because before I gave them any answer, I needed one more thing. I needed them to reveal the full depth of what they truly believed about me. And they were only halfway there. Don't miss the next part. Vivian makes one final bold assumption about my life. And that's when I begin turning the conversation in a direction she never saw coming. Vivian sat back with the confidence of someone who believed she had solved a delicate problem with elegance and generosity. Terrence nodded approvingly as if the matter were nearly closed. Yalin stared down at his plate, shame thick on his face. While Kiana twisted her napkin, clearly wishing this conversation had never happened. But I wasn't finished. I tilted my head slightly, my voice still soft, still fragile, still exactly what they expected. I understand your concerns, I whispered. Truly, it's kind of you to think about my future. Vivian's face brightened, her relief palpable. That's all we want, Denise. To make sure everyone is secure. We know you've lived a simpler life. That can be difficult. There it was again, simple. The word they wore like a glove whenever they touched me. I took a slow breath and continued. And you feel confident that, financially, I might struggle later on? Vivian answered quickly, eager to explain her logic. Well, yes. It's natural. At your age, with a lower-paying job and limited savings, unexpected situations can be overwhelming. We've seen it in our community too often, Terrence added. We don't want you to feel burdened by expenses. Things like medical bills, rent increases, retirement. These things can become complicated. Huh? I nodded thoughtfully. So you believe I won't be able to manage those? Vivian gave me a sympathetic smile, the kind people reserve for someone they've already decided is helpless. It's not your fault. Some people simply didn't have the opportunities others did. And that's okay. That's why support exists. Support. They said it as if I should fall to my knees in gratitude. I kept my voice almost shy. And you're certain that what I have now won't be enough? Vivian reached across the table and touched my hand delicately, as though she feared I might crumble like paper. We're positive, Denise. It's just reality. You'll need help. Kiana winced slightly at her mother's bluntness, but she didn't speak. Yalin clenched his fist again, refusing to look up. I let the moment linger, then spoke softly. You mentioned opportunities and limitations. If you don't mind, may I ask what you think I do? For work. Vivian laughed lightly, a small, indulgent sound. Oh, Denise, you don't have to be embarrassed. Yolande told us you're an office clerk of some kind. Maybe administrative support. There's no shame in that. Terrence nodded. Honest work is honorable. Vivian added quickly, of course, it doesn't pay much. but it's stable, reliable, a good fit for someone who prefers a quieter life. Quiet, meaning small, unimportant. I lowered my eyes again. And you think I don't earn much? Vivian squeezed my hand. Don't worry. We don't judge people for their income. We judge character. I almost smiled at that. Almost. She continued, and clearly, you've done your best with what life allowed you. That's admirable. What life allowed me. As if I'd been dealt a weak hand and simply accepted it. I folded my hands neatly on my lap. So, just so I understand, you feel I am financially unstable, professionally limited, and dependent on my son. Vivian nodded gently. Yes, and that's why we're offering help. This arrangement will give you dignity and peace, Terrence added, and it will give the newlyweds the space they need. Everyone wins. I looked up with a meek, almost grateful expression. Well, thank you for explaining. Vivian exhaled, visibly satisfied. She believed she had guided a lost woman toward clarity. But something subtle shifted in my posture. A tiny movement they didn't notice. The first crack in the mask. Because now that I had heard the full shape of their assumptions, it was my turn to shape the conversation. I straightened my napkin gently, lifted my eyes, and said in the softest voice, "There's something I should probably tell you." Vivian blinked, curious. Terrence leaned in. Kiana sat up straighter. Yolan lifted his head, hopeful. Vivian smiled. Of course, Denise. What is it? I placed my hands calmly on the table and prepared to turn their entire evening upside down. Don't miss the next part. The first truth I reveal leaves the entire table silent. And Vivian's confidence takes its first real hit. I rested my palms lightly on the table, my posture still gentle, still small, still everything they believed me to be. Vivian waited with that same soft, triumphant smile. Terrence leaned forward with the confidence of a man certain he was in control. Kiana swallowed hard, uncertain, and Yolan. He sat frozen, eyes locked on me, as if silently begging for something he couldn't put into words. I exhaled quietly. There's something I should tell you, I repeated, my voice delicate but steady. Vivian gave an encouraging nod. We're listening, dear. I folded the edges of my napkin with slow precision, giving her a moment to enjoy the last seconds of her certainty. Well, I began. I wanted to let you know that I recently made a change in my life. Terrence raised a brow. A change? Yes, I said softly. After many years, I stepped away from my job. Vivian's face lit up with relief. Oh, that must be hard. But don't worry, Denise, we can help. That's exactly why our arrangement is so important. I nodded, pretending to appreciate the sentiment. Yes, I retired. Vivian froze. Just a flicker. The first crack. Retired. She repeated, masking her surprise with a polite smile. From your position at the office? I shook my head gently. No, I didn't work in an office. Not the way you think. Terrence's expression tightened slightly. Oh, then where did you? I interrupted softly. I wasn't a clerk. Or administrative support. I've never actually worked those kinds of roles. A stillness settled over the table. The kind that arrives before a truth rearranges the room. Vivian blinked. I'm not sure I follow. I kept my tone quiet, almost apologetic. For nearly 2 decades, I worked as a senior strategic executive at a multinational company. Vivian's smile faltered. Terrence's eyes narrowed not in anger, but confusion. I continued. I handled corporate restructuring, international negotiations, mergers, expansions. Big projects. Big responsibilities. Vivian gave a small, laugh-forced brittle. Oh, well, titles these days can mean anything, can't they? I shook my head softly. This one meant quite a lot, I'm afraid. I reached into my old canvas tote bag, one they'd judged harshly since the moment. I arrived and pulled out a simple leather portfolio. Nothing flashy. Nothing loud. Inside, among other things, was the retirement packet I had received just weeks earlier. I slid it toward Vivian gently. You don't have to read it now, I said, but it explains my role and the company's acknowledgement of my service. Vivian touched the folder with hesitant fingers, the confidence draining from her face. Terrence frowned. But Yolan said he didn't know, I whispered. I never told him. I wanted him to grow without leaning on my career or my money. Silence washed over the table. Even the waiter approaching with a tray slowed down, sensing something had shifted. Vivian opened the folder slowly, scanning the header. Her eyes widened. Her lips parted slightly. And for the first time that evening, she looked genuinely unsure of herself. Kiana leaned in, reading over her shoulder. She gasped softly. Yalan looked between them, trying to decode their reactions. Vivian closed the folder gently, unable to hide the tremor in her hand. You worked in corporate strategy? At this level? She asked, her voice thinner than before. Yes, I said softly, for 18 years. Terrence's face paled a shade. That's significant. Vivian cleared her throat delicately, trying to regain composure. Well, that still doesn't necessarily mean I interrupted kindly. It means I wasn't struggling. And I'm not dependent on anyone. Vivian swallowed. The woman who once looked down at me with pity, now looked at me with dawning uncertainty. I sat back quietly, letting the truth settle, letting them wrestle with their assumptions. This was only the beginning. Don't miss the next part. The next truth I reveal doesn't just unsettle them. It changes the entire tone of the table. Asterisk? Vivian's fingers stayed on the leather folder as though it might burn her if she held it too long. Terrence kept his eyes fixed on me, studying, recalculating, adjusting the image he had built of me in his mind. Kiana sat stiff as stone, her jaw tense, her gaze flicking between her parents and me. But Yalan. He looked stunned. Not because he doubted me, but because he was realizing how much he never knew. I kept my posture small, my voice soft, letting the weight of the truth settle into the room. Vivian cleared her throat lightly, the sound thin and fragile. Well, titles can sometimes be misleading. These companies often exaggerate roles to make employees feel important. Her tone tried to sound casual, but the strain around her eyes gave her away. I opened the folder again, sliding out a single sheet. This, I said gently, is my retirement letter. From the CEO. Terrence leaned forward, scanning the header. Then he stopped. His eyes narrowed, recognizing the name of the corporation, a company he clearly knew well. Vivian's hand twitched. Kiana murmured under her breath. That's a major firm. Mom, isn't that the one you said was impossible to get into? Vivian didn't answer. I continued calmly. I stepped down last month. My work required long hours and extensive travel. It became time for me to rest. Terrence finally spoke. Slower this time. And your income. What were you earning? I looked at him without raising my voice. A little over $38,000 a month. Sometimes more with bonuses. Vivian inhaled sharply, the first unfiltered reaction she'd given all night. Kiana stared at me in disbelief. Mom, you never told us that. Never told anyone. I replied softly. I wanted my son to grow into his own life. Not mine. Silence settled like dust. Vivian forced a smile, strained, trembling. Well, even so, retiring can. Change circumstances quickly. Savings don't last forever. I nodded. That's true. But she had no idea how wrong she was. I reached into my tote again, pulling out a small envelope. Inside was a printed summary one I kept for personal records. When I placed it on the table, Vivian hesitated before touching it. Her eyes scanned the document. Her lips parted. Her brows lifted. Her entire face shifted. She read it twice, then a third time. Terrence leaned over her shoulder and his jaw tightened. Kiana's eyes widened, her breath catching in her throat. I sat still, watching this slow unraveling. Vivian finally looked up, her voice barely holding its shape. This says you have several investment accounts, properties. And she stopped, swallowing hard. This can't be correct. It is, I said softly. Vivian blinked. You have. This much saved. Yes. Terrence leaned back, stunned into silence. My God. Vivian tried to recover her poise, smoothing the fabric of her dress, adjusting her jewelry, pretending to be composed. But nothing could hide the shift in her eyes, the sudden uncertainty. The quiet panic, the dawning realization that she had misjudged everything. She was no longer talking to the woman she believed lived on a tiny salary in a small apartment. She was talking to someone she didn't understand. She cleared her throat again. Well, money isn't everything. Status doesn't define a person. I nodded gently. I agree. She paused, and we weren't trying to imply anything negative. We were only trying to help. Her words wobbled, losing the elegance they once carried. Terrence added, yes, we're a family. We should support one another. I raised my eyes slowly, meeting theirs with quiet calm. Support is important, I said, but so is respect. Vivian flinched. Kiana covered her mouth slightly, as if embarrassed for her parents. And Yolan. He looked at me with something deeper than surprise, something like gratitude mixed with regret. Vivian opened her mouth to respond, but before she could form a single word, I gently folded the documents back into my tote. Then I looked up and said, there's more. Something else I haven't mentioned yet. The entire table stilled. Don't miss the next part. The next truth I reveal changes not only their perception of me, but the entire power dynamic of the evening. The room seemed to shrink the moment I said those words. Vivian's breathing grew shallow, her fingers tightening around the stem of her wineglass. Terrence's posture stiffened, shoulders rising just slightly as if bracing himself. Kiana stared at me, wide-eyed, and Yalone leaned forward, his expression silently pleading for clarity. I rested my hands gently on the table. There's something else you should know, I repeated calmly. Vivian attempted a smile, one so forced it looked painful. Oh, more surprises? She asked, trying to sound amused, though her voice carried an undeniable tremor. I nodded. Yes, and I think it's time to share it. Terrence cleared his throat. If this is about finances, Denise, I think we understand the situation better now. I shook my head softly. No, this isn't about money. Vivian blinked at me, uncertainty settling into her features. I adjusted the strap of my old canvas tote, the one that looked out of place in a five-star restaurant, and spoke gently. I stepped away from my executive position because I accepted a new one. Vivian's eyebrows lifted. A new job? At your age? Her tone wasn't insulting this time, just startled. Yes, I answered. I wasn't ready to retire completely. I simply retired from one chapter. Terrence frowned. May I ask, what sort of position? I opened my portfolio again and pulled out a single crisp envelope with a company logo in the corner. I placed it in the center of the table. I was offered a consulting role, I said quietly. International projects. Flexible schedule. Better pay. Vivian stared at the envelope as though it might explode. Kiana whispered consulting. I nodded. My former employer didn't want to lose my experience entirely, so they created a role with fewer hours but higher compensation. Vivian swallowed hard. And how much will you be earning? Her voice was barely a whisper. I answered without raising my tone. $45,000 a month. The silence that followed wasn't silence at all. It was stunned, heavy, breath-held disbelief. Vivian's lips parted, but no words came out. Her elegant posture sagged just a little. Terrence leaned back in his seat slowly, like he needed the extra space to process the information. Kiana covered her mouth, eyes flickering with shock. And Yalan, my sweet boy, closed his eyes for a moment, exhaling with a mixture of relief and something like guilt. Vivian finally found her voice, though it trembled. Well, this is unexpected. I gave a soft nod. I imagine it is. Vivian's composure cracked another inch. So you're comfortable? Financially? Professionally? Yes. Her throat bobbed as she swallowed again. And you never needed help? Not from us. Not from anyone? No. I replied gently. I never needed help. Vivian clasped her hands together, pressing them tightly. Her face softened not with kindness, but with the realization that the power she believed she held was slipping through her fingers. Terence tried to recover, straightening his posture. Well, it's admirable, truly. But you must understand, Denise, we only ask those questions because we want the best for the children. I met his gaze calmly. I understand wanting the best, but assumptions can cause harm, even when dressed as concern. Vivian looked down at her plate, her earlier confidence crumbling silently. The energy at the table shifted entirely. Where I had once sat beneath their judgment, I now sat, I too, or perhaps a bit above it. Not because of wealth or titles, but because the truth had weight. And that weight had finally settled where it belonged. I reached for my water glass and took a slow sip. Then I placed it down and said quietly, "And there's still one more thing I haven't shared yet." Every pair of eyes lifted toward me. Don't miss the next part. The final truth I reveal stops the table cold and pushes the evening toward a turning point none of them expected. Asterisk. The table had gone silent, so silent I could hear the soft hum of the chandelier above us. Vivian's fingers trembled slightly against her wineglass. Terence leaned forward, elbows on the table, the confidence he had displayed earlier now carefully wrapped in caution. Kiana sat frozen, her eyes moving slowly between her parents and me. And Yalin. He watched me with a mixture of astonishment and something more fragile, apology. I kept my voice calm, gentle, steady. "There's one more thing I haven't told you." I said. Vivian forced herself upright, trying desperately to regain even a sliver of the composure she'd held earlier. "Well, go on," she managed, though the words came out thin. I folded my hands neatly in front of me. For years, I deliberately chose to live simply. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Terence frowned. "I'm not sure I understand." I nodded slowly. I wanted my son to grow up knowing values, not luxury. I didn't want him to think life owed him anything, or that success meant stepping on others. So I kept my world small around him, my home modest, my expenses minimal. Vivian blinked rapidly, trying to catch up. "You mean you could have lived differently?" "Yes," I said softly. "But I wanted Jalen's character to be built by effort, not shortcuts." Terence exhaled sharply, realization showing in his eyes. "You hid your wealth." "Not hid," I corrected gently. "I simply didn't parade it. There's a difference." Vivian shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her earlier confidence now reduced to careful, measured breaths. Kiana finally spoke, voice trembling. "So all this time, you were living below your means." "Yes, and you didn't want anyone to know." "No," Yalan rubbed his forehead, his voice quiet. "Ma, why didn't you tell me?" I turned to him, my expression softening. "Because you didn't need to know. You had to build your own foundation. And you did, Yolan. You did it beautifully." His eyes watered, but he blinked quickly, swallowing hard. Vivian's voice came out brittle. "But even so, why live like that? Why let people think she stopped herself?" But the word hung in the air anyway. Lest I breathed deeply, refusing to let her guilt or shame twist the truth. "Because wealth doesn't change who I am," I said gently. "And if someone treats me differently based on what they think I have or don't have, then that tells me exactly what I need to know about them." Vivian's face tightened. She knew exactly what that meant, and I continued quietly. "There's another reason I live the way I do." The table leaned in slightly, barely noticeable, but unmistakable. I reached into my tote one last time, pulling out a small keyring. On it were 2 keys, simple, plain, nothing remarkable except for the weight they carried. "These," I said softly, "belong to a home I purchased years ago. A home I planned to give my son when the time was right." Yolan stared at the keys as if they were glowing. Vivian's entire body tensed. "A home," she repeated. "You bought a home?" "Yes, quietly. No announcements. No expectations. Terrence swallowed, voice strained. What kind of home? I looked directly at him. A 3-story property, 5 bedrooms, a garden, 2-car garage, safe neighborhood, fully paid. Vivian gasped, the sound sharp and involuntary. Kiana's hand flew to her mouth. Yalin stared at me, stunned beyond words. Vivian tried to recover, but all elegance had vanished. You were going to give them. But yes, I said. But only when I felt confident my place in their lives was respected, not negotiated. The truth landed like a stone dropped into still water. Vivian lowered her head, her polished exterior shattered by humility she wasn't prepared for. I set the keys back into my bag gently. Everything I've shared tonight, I said softly, was never meant to impress you. It was meant to clarify something. You misjudged me, and misjudgment has consequences. Terrence inhaled slowly, unable to speak. Kiana wiped a tear. And Yalan, he whispered, Ma. But I raised a hand gently, letting him know I wasn't finished yet. Don't miss the next part. Vivian tries to regain control of the evening. But the next thing she says changes the direction of the night entirely. Vivian lifted her head slowly, her expression a patchwork of confusion, embarrassment, and something she'd managed to hide the entire evening: fear. The kind of fear a person feels when they suddenly realize the ground beneath them isn't solid anymore. Terrence shifted in his seat, adjusting his cufflinks even though nothing was out of place, trying to reassemble whatever remained of his dignity. But dignity is hard to hold on to when the truth has stripped away every assumption you walked in with. Kiana stared at her lap as if she hoped disappearing into her own shadow would erase the memory of everything her parents had said. Kulin didn't look at anyone except me, his eyes full of questions he wasn't ready to ask out loud. Vivian inhaled slowly, trying to reclaim the polished voice she had used so effortlessly earlier. Denise, she began, her tone soft, overly gentle. Perhaps I misunderstood. Maybe we approached things poorly tonight. It was the closest she had come to admitting fault. Terrence nodded stiffly. This evening was meant to be a pleasant one. We didn't intend to cause tension. I folded my napkin carefully, not saying anything yet. I wanted to see where this new version of their conversation was heading. Vivian clasped her hands together. We were concerned, perhaps overly so. Parenting never truly ends, does it? Her smile trembled. Jalen shifted uncomfortably. Mom wouldn't have been a burden, he said quietly. She never has been. Vivian flinched not at the words themselves, but at the guilt attached to them. Of course, she replied quickly. Course she wouldn't. We simply didn't know her situation. I finally spoke, keeping my tone calm. You didn't ask. Vivian's mouth opened slightly, but no words followed. Because that truth was impossible to deny. I continued. You built a story about who I was based on what you saw, not what you learned. Terrence exhaled slowly, looking down at his plate. Vivian straightened her shoulders. Well, she said carefully, perhaps we misinterpreted a few things. But surely you understand why we might want clarity. Yolan is our daughter's husband. His stability matters to us. Stability, I repeated softly. Vivian nodded. Yes, the foundation of a strong marriage. And you believed I threatened that? Her breath caught. I wouldn't say that. Not exactly. You implied it? I said gently. It's just like you implied I needed your money. It's just like you implied I didn't belong at certain parts of my son's life. Vivian's eyes watered barely, but enough to reveal the crack. Kiana whispered, Mom, stop. Vivian looked at her daughter, startled. I'm not attacking her, she said defensively. I'm explaining. Kiana shook her head slowly. No, you're justifying. The room grew still. It was the first time Kiana had contradicted her mother the entire night. Vivian looked between the two of us, helplessly searching for a version of the conversation she could still control. I decided to give her none instead. I leaned forward slightly, my voice still soft but impossibly clear. You asked me to step back, I said. To make myself small so their life could feel bigger. You believed you were protecting them, but you were dismissing me. Vivian wiped the corner of her eye with a trembling fingertip. I didn't mean to hurt you, she whispered. Intentions. Sometimes the quietest, most dangerous excuse. I know, I replied, but you did. Terrence finally looked up. What do you want from us now? Kay asked, not harshly, but honestly. I shook my head. Nothing. Vivian blinked. Nothing, no money, no apologies, no explanations. I don't need anything from you. Her confusion deepened. Then why tell us all this? Because truth resets a table, I answered softly. And this table needed resetting. Vivian lowered her gaze. I could feel the shift. Not dramatic, not loud, but deep. A realignment of respect neither of them expected to feel. I reached for my water glass again. There's still something left to address. I said quietly. Vivian looked up sharply. What now? Don't miss the next part. The conversation turns toward Yalin and Kiana. And what comes next forces the entire family to confront what truly matters. Asterisk, the air around the table grew heavier. Like every person there sensed the shift coming. Vivian's eyes darted between me and Yolan, as though she feared where the conversation might turn. Terrence straightened in his chair, bracing himself, while Kiana slowly released a breath she'd been holding for several minutes. But Yalon, my son looked at me with a mixture of hope and fear, both fighting for space in his expression. I want to speak with Yalon and Kiana, I said quietly. Vivian flinched. Terrence froze. Kiana's eyes widened. And Yalon, he lowered his head slightly, as if preparing himself, kept my hands folded neatly in front of me. You two, I said softly, turning toward the newlyweds, are building a life together. One that doesn't depend on money or status, but on respect. And tonight we all learned just how fragile respect can be when assumptions get in the way. Kiana swallowed hard. It's Mrs. Holloway. I never wanted tonight to feel like this. I know, I said gently. You've always treated me with kindness, even when your parents overstepped. Vivian's breath caught, but she didn't interrupt. Kiana continued, voice trembling. I never asked them to do any of this. I didn't know what they planned to say. I swear, I nodded. That's why I'm talking to you now. Not as your husband's mother, but as someone who wants your marriage to be stronger than the judgments surrounding you. Yalin leaned closer, his voice barely above a whisper. Ma, I'm so sorry. I reached across the table and touched his hand. You are not responsible for what others assumed. But you are responsible for how you carry yourself moving forward. He bowed his head, understanding settling quietly on his shoulders. Kiana wiped her eyes quickly. What do you want us to do? I breathed deeply. I want you both to remember that marriage is not a competition of families. It's not about who has more, who earns more, or whose background looks better on paper. It's about how you treat each other when no one else is watching. Yolan nodded. And I continued. You must protect your marriage from outside pressure, even when that pressure comes from the people you love. Vivian's lips parted, but Terrence placed a hand gently on her arm, stopping her from speaking. Kiana reached for Jalen's hand under the table. We understand, she whispered. I turned my gaze slowly toward Vivian and Terrence. Tonight wasn't about proving anything, I said. Not money, not status, not titles. It was about clarity. Vivian looked away, ashamed but listening. I have my own resources, I continued. My own life, my own identity. I don't need your approval, your money, or your arrangements. And I never asked for them. Terrence nodded slowly. We misjudged you. Yes, I replied gently. But that's not my concern anymore. Vivian blinked back tears she didn't want anyone to see. My concern, I said firmly, but calmly, is what happens next for Yolan and Kiana. How they move forward from tonight. How they grow. How they honor what marriage actually requires. Yolan wiped his palms on his pants subtly, nerves finally releasing. I want to do better, he said quietly. I want to be the kind of husband who can navigate things like this without falling apart. Kiana held his arm. We'll do better, both of us. I smiled softly. That's all I wanted. The table fell into a deep, fragile, quiet one that wasn't filled with judgment or superiority, but reckoning. Vivian exhaled shakily. Is there more we should know? I lifted my water glass, took a slow sip, then set it down carefully. Yes, I said. There is one last thing I need to tell all of you. Every eye rose toward me. Don't miss the next part. The final truth I reveal shifts the emotional weight of the night and forces the entire table to confront what's really been hidden all along. Everyone watched me with a kind of breathless anticipation. The kind that fills a room when people sense a truth is coming, one that might soften wounds or deepen them. Vivian sat perfectly still, her fingers laced so tightly her knuckles had turned pale. Terrence tried to appear composed, but the slight tremor in his jaw betrayed him. Kiana clung gently to Jalen's arm, searching his face for strength. And my son? He looked at me with the quiet desperation of a man hoping what I was about to say might help him understand everything he hadn't understood before. I placed my palms flat on the table, steady and unshaking. There's one last piece I need all of you to know, I began softly. Not about my finances. Not about my career. Not about my lifestyle. Yolan leaned closer. Ma, whatever it is, I'm listening. I nodded. This is about why I kept my life so private. Why I didn't tell you about the home, the accounts, the consulting role. Any of it. Vivian swallowed hard. We assumed it was to teach humility. That was part of it, I said gently. But not the whole story. I inhaled slowly, letting the weight of memory settle in my chest before speaking again. Years ago, before Yolan was even old enough to tie his own shoes, I made a mistake. Not with money or choices, but with people. Terrence's brow furrowed. People. Yes, I said. Someone I cared about, someone I trusted, changed the moment they learned I was earning well. They became unkind, entitled, demanding. Suddenly, I wasn't a person anymore. I was a resource. The table grew still. I swore after that day, I continued, voice steady but soft, that I would never allow money to change the way someone treated me, or the way I treated others. Vivian lowered her eyes. So I kept my career quiet, my income modest looking, my home simple. I wanted to know who was in my life because they valued me, and not what I had. Kiana nodded slowly, blinking away tears. Make sense? Jalan whispered. Ma, you should have told me. Not the money part, just the reason. I smiled sadly. You were too young then. And as you grew, it became habit. Silence became safety. Vivian lifted her head, guilt softening her expression. So tonight, you were testing us. No, I said firmly. I was revealing you. Terrence exhaled sharply, the truth hitting him square in the chest. I continued. I didn't come here to embarrass anyone. I didn't come here to prove anything. I came here because my son asked. But when you began talking about boundaries, about me being a burden, about offering money for distance, you told me more about yourselves than I ever asked to know. Vivian closed her eyes, shame settling visibly on her face. And then I said quietly, you asked why I lived the way I do, why I disguised my life, why I don't flaunt what I have. Shalon's voice cracked. You were protecting yourself. And protecting you, I added, because no child should learn to measure worth in material things. Vivian dabbed her eyes with her napkin. I didn't realize, she whispered. I didn't see you clearly at all. No, I replied softly. You saw what you wanted to see. Terrence leaned forward. What happens now? He asked carefully. I looked between Yolan and Kiana. That depends on them. I've shared my truth. The rest belongs to the two of you. Kiana nodded, gripping Jalen's hand tightly. We'll handle it, she said, voice trembling but resolute. I pushed my chair back gently. But before this night ends, I said, there's one more thing I must address, and it concerns the both of you as a couple. Yolan and Kiana sat up straight. Vivian held her breath. Terrence leaned in, and the room waited. Don't miss the next part. The final chapter brings everything full circle, ending with the reflection this family never expected to face. Asterisk, I looked from Yolan to Kiana, letting the silence settle between us before I spoke. This wasn't a moment to rush. It needed calm. It needed weight. You two, I began softly, are standing at the beginning of a life that will test you in ways you can't yet imagine. Marriage isn't a picture you hang on the wall, it's a living thing. It grows, it withers, it changes shape depending on how you treat it. Kiana squeezed Jalen's hand, the gesture small but full of meaning. I continued. Tonight showed me something important. Not just about your parents, but about the two of you. Yolan swallowed hard. What did it show you, Ma? That your bond is stronger than the noise around it, I said gently. Even when the evening shifted, even when pressure was placed on the both of you, you stayed connected. You didn't raise your voices. You didn't fall apart. You held on to each other. Kiana blinked away fresh tears. We tried, and you succeeded, I reassured her. Terrence shifted in his seat, looking humbled. Vivian sat quietly, her shoulders no longer stiff with pride, but lowered with a kind of quiet remorse. I turned to my son. Yalan, I said softly, you've grown into a man who wants to protect his home. Even if you stumbled tonight, your heart was in the right place. I'm proud of you. His eyes filled instantly, and he looked down, unable to speak. Then I turned to Kiana. You love my son. That's clear. And you tried your best to keep peace tonight, even when things became uncomfortable. You showed grace when many wouldn't have. And I respect that. She exhaled shakily. Thank you. That means a lot. I nodded, then added something I had held in my heart since the moment I walked in. But marriage isn't only about love and effort. It's about honesty, about transparency, about recognizing when silence does more harm than truth. I paused, letting the message sink in. I kept things from my son to protect him, to protect myself. And tonight I realized that kind of silence isn't always strength. Sometimes it builds distance. Yolan finally looked up. I don't want distance, he said hoarsely. Not from you and not from my wife. And now you know exactly what it takes to avoid it, I told him. Kiana nodded slowly. We'll communicate more. With each other. With you. With everyone. Vivian let out a shaky breath. I didn't realize how much I was interfering, or how it must have felt to be spoken to the way I spoke to you. I turned to her, my expression gentle. People grow, Vivian. Sometimes painfully. Tonight was painful for all of us, but growth rarely feels comfortable. She nodded, tears finally breaking past her composure. I'm sorry, Denise. I truly am. Terrence added quietly, we'll do better moving forward. I accepted their words with a small, calm smile, because forgiveness doesn't require perfection. It only requires intention. I reached into my tote one last time and pulled out the keyring I had shown earlier. I placed it in the center of the table. I bought that home to be a foundation for the future, I said. But foundations mean nothing if the people involved don't have clarity, respect, or unity. Tonight gave us all of that. Yolan took the keys gently, as though they were made of glass. Ma, thank you for everything, for trusting us with the truth. I touched his cheek softly. It was time. The weight in the room shifted, no longer heavy with judgment, but full of possibility. The evening had begun with assumptions, bruised pride, and quiet insults. But it was ending with understanding. And that, to me, was worth every moment. As we rose from the table, I felt something settle inside me. Peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because everything was honest. And honesty is the root of every strong family. If this story touched your heart, please like the video and subscribe for more inspiring stories. And if you have any questions or want to know what happened next with the characters, comment below. I'll be reading them all. Sometimes life takes turns we never expect. Every person in this story carried their own pain, their own choices, and their own consequences. Maybe you saw yourself in one of them, or maybe it reminded you of someone you once knew. What do you think happened next? What would you have done if you were in their place? If you have any questions about what happened to the other characters, or if you want me to share more about them, just comment below. I read every message you leave, and your thoughts truly mean a lot to me. And if this story touched your heart, inspired you, or even made you think differently, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps me keep sharing stories that move people, open minds, and remind us we're all human. At the end of the day, your support keeps these stories alive. Thank you for watching, for feeling, and for being part of this journey. More powerful stories are coming soon. Stay tuned and stay kind.